The survival of a king, the lineage of a future Messiah, and the fate of an entire nation rested on a single, secret arrow. This moment is captured in the historical records of 1 Samuel chapter 20, a text that reads less like an ancient chronicle and more like an intense survival thriller. Israel was in the middle of a succession crisis. David, the man anointed to be the next king, was being hunted by the current one, leaving the kingdom on the edge of a violent internal collapse. To see if David could ever return to the palace, he and his closest ally orchestrated a psychological test during the new moon feast, designed to force the king to reveal his true heart. King Saul was trapped in a cycle of paranoia. He viewed his throne not as a gift to be held for a season, but as a possession to be protected at any cost, even through violence. His son, Jonathan, occupied a very different headspace. As the crown prince, he was the man who had the most to lose if David became king. Yet Jonathan chose to prioritize David's safety over his own royal claim. He was willing to step aside from his inheritance, effectively surrendering his own future for the sake of a promise. This diagram shows the trap they set, the banquet table at the new moon feast. David's empty chair was the trigger. They knew that if Saul's hatred was permanent, the sight of that vacant seat would cause him to snap. The feast became a collision point between two ways of life, one that clings to power through jealousy and one that finds peace through spiritual surrender. The air in the banquet hall grew heavy as King Saul looked across the table and saw that David had not arrived for the second day. When Jonathan attempted to explain David's absence, Saul's composure shattered. His obsession with control finally spiraled into uncontrollable rage. Saul didn't just shout. He grabbed his spear and hurled it through the air directly at his own son. The strike missed, but the message was clear. Saul was now so consumed by the need to protect his position that he was willing to murder the very son meant to carry on his legacy. Jonathan stood up and left the table in a cold, fierce anger. He finally had his answer. David's death sentence was now absolute. With the palace now a death trap, the survival of the future king moved from the halls of power to the uncertainty of the open field. The next morning, Jonathan went out to a predetermined spot in the field, carrying his bow and accompanied by a young servant who knew nothing of the secret stakes. This map illustrates the code they used to communicate without words. Jonathan would shoot an arrow, and the distance it traveled past the boy, represented by this dashed line, would tell David whether to stay or run. Jonathan drew his bow and released. The arrow soared through the morning air and landed far out in the field. "The arrow is beyond you," Jonathan called out to the boy. It sounded like a simple instruction to a servant, but it was a life-saving signal to David, who was hiding nearby. In this moment, we see God as a silent protector. He used human ingenuity and a deep, loyal friendship to shield the man he had chosen to lead his people. The code worked perfectly. The warning was received, the escape was triggered, and the future of the nation was preserved. Once the boy was sent back to the city, David emerged from the shadows. The danger was clear, but the pain of the parting was heavier. They stood in a sunlit field, embracing in the shadow of death. They weren't just saying goodbye. They were reaffirming a covenant that would bind their families together for generations. In that embrace, they formally handed over the outcome of their lives to God, acknowledging that their futures were now entirely in His hands. This narrow escape did more than save a life. It ensured that the line leading to the Messiah remained unbroken. Jonathan's willingness to let his own royal future fade so David's could rise provides the ultimate model for a spiritual community, one that prioritizes the calling of others over personal status. David's immediate move into exile also mirrors a deeper spiritual truth. It reminds us that the life of faith often feels like a journey through a world that is not our home, a temporary stay in a land where we are often misunderstood or hunted. When we face our own crises, we often feel the urge to seize control or force the plot to go our way. But this story points to a heavenly director who is orchestrating a much larger narrative. When we stop trying to rewrite our own scripts and instead focus on being faithful in the moments we've been given, we allow God to use our lives in His breathtaking, redemptive epic.